Welcome to Hochoka Podcast.
Some critics of Christianity find a connection between a Christian perspective that places humankind over and other than the created world and the shaky ecological health of our planet. Servant of God Nicholas Black Elk and the ghost dance tradition say, not so quick. Hello, Medaki Api, and welcome to Hochoka, here at the center of St. Joseph's Indian School's campus. I'm Scott Wooster, your Hochoka host. We're glad you've joined our circle with frequent guest Dr. Damian Costello, who joins us again today with another fresh perspective on Christianity through an indigenous lens. Welcome back, Damian.
Thanks, Scott.
So, we set it up off screen and said we're gonna work a little bit to land this particular concept that we're going with today, and I think it's going to be great. I really do. You and I have talked a lot about Nicholas Black Elk. You're a Black Elk scholar, and you have studied him for quite some time and championed who he was. We talked about him in our first season. Some of our audience might still not be familiar if they haven't seen some of that. I would encourage them to go back to season 1. But we'll just give a little bio of this Native American man from Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota who was also up for sainthood in the Catholic Church. So just in your own words, please.
Well, he's a second cousin of Crazy Horse. He was at so many of the iconic events in Lakota history. So he was at the Battle of Little Bighorn. He was at Wounded Knee, fought there and was wounded. He traveled with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show in Europe for 3 years. And he was given a great vision at the age of 9. I guess is the most important thing that happened to him. Lasted 12 days. And he was called to heal his people, to lead them down the sacred red road. And so he spent his whole life discerning what that would mean. Like, what did that calling mean? And so first, it meant that he was a traditional healer. For a number of decades, he became Catholic in 1904 and was a lay preacher, a catechist, brought 400 people into the church and was known for his memorization of the Bible in Lakota and his preaching style. And then he became famous when he was interviewed in 1930 by John Neihart through the book Black Elk Speaks, and then finally The Sacred Pipe, which was published just before he died in 1948, I believe it was. That was his account of the 7 sacred rites of the Lakota people.
And he's perhaps the greatest embodiment of the idea of melding cultures, melding spiritualities, all of that kind of thing that we might have here. We're going to talk a lot about the ghost dance today. The ghost dance came around in a time when he was still a young man. Would you say?
Yes.
So let's just talk about ghost dance, maybe for folks who might not be familiar with the ghost dance. Give us a little introductory course on that, if you would.
Yeah, the ghost dance started in southern Nevada among the Paiute people. And it was Jack Wilson who was given a vision, like Black Elk, but that the world was going to be transformed, and that he had some Mormon influence. He was very strong in his own Paiute ways, and he saw that Jesus had come as a white person first, and the white people had killed him, and he was going to come back as an Indian this time. He had heard the cries of his red children, so the vision went. And that all that needed to be done was to dance this new dance, sing these new songs, live in peace, do what the white people tell you, send your kids to school, work hard, and the old ways will come back. And so this spread like wildfire through the Great Basin, the Rocky Mountains, and the Great Plains, and came to Pine Ridge and Lakota country, where Black Elk heard about this. He was about 24 years old, 1890 was when he became part of the ghost dance, and he wasn't sure about it at first. He's like, I'm not sure if this is what my vision is calling me to do, but he visited it and he saw, this looks similar, the dance looks like my vision, and so he participated, and he had a great vision, his last great vision in the ghost dance, where he was taken up into the sky and over to the promised land, where he saw the Messiah, ghost dance Messiah, Wanikia, he who makes live, and he had his hands were pierced, and he told Black Elk, everything has been given to me by my father, and you must say this. This was a personal call to Black Elk to follow him. And so Black Elk became a ghost dancer and was there at Wounded Knee when it occurred shortly after.
So, and I've heard this story many times now. In fact, you and I think, even touched on it in previous seasons. But I always kind of marvel at the idea that this comes from Nevada, works its way up to this country, and you're talking about holes in hands, Messiah, Jesus Christ kinds of things. And how does this sit, with the folks that are here practicing their sweat lodges and sun dances and so forth?
So on the one hand, you have to be clear that there was this process of discernment, and not everybody was 100% on board. Like Black Elk himself debated, is this something worth following? And not everybody did.
Yeah.
I think probably about half would have been the highest amount at any given time.
Yeah.
But those that did accept it saw it in congruity with their Lakota spirituality. So if you think of Lakota spirituality, if you had to boil it down, you can't, but if you want to boil it down to like its ultimate point, the prayer is, Black Elk says, the most important prayer is that the people may live. That these prayers and practices are for the life of the people. And so the ghost dance message isn't that different. Wanikia means he who makes live.
Yeah.
So that the essence of Wanikia, of this Jesus figure, is giving life. Now the difference is it's giving new life. It's talking about life as restoration, as renewal in the context of this sort of significant stress and collapse. So where the Lakota spirituality, you practice the sun dance to honor the buffalo so that they will sacrifice themselves so that people may live.
Yeah.
Wanikia is going to bring this dramatic new power to make live, to deal with the situation that the buffalo are now almost all gone.
Times were hard. Things were very difficult at the time that the ghost dance came around, and we're gonna take this in kind of a neat little direction here, I think, which will enlighten me and our viewers too. But what were times like when this was happening?
Well, I mean, this was the sort of epitome of Lakota suffering. Buffalo were almost entirely exterminated. People had nothing to eat. They were forced into prison camps on the reservation, military occupation. Boarding schools are starting, cultural genocide, all of that.
Wounded Knee had just happened.
Wounded Knee comes out of this. So Wounded Knee was a response to the ghost dance.
Yeah, correct, yeah.
By all accounts, the ghost dance was entirely peaceful, and the U.S. military responded with violence. They couldn't help but seeing this as a revolt.
Yeah.
But what I find interesting is, Scott, we do this all the time in these episodes, is, we're used to the Christian looking at Lakota tradition and saying, okay, what's of value, what's okay, let's figure it out. I want to flip that around.
Yeah.
Like, what if you looked at Christianity from the perspective of the ghost dance?
Yeah.
What do we see that maybe we hadn't seen before?
Yeah.
And I think that from that perspective, you see a lot of the same things going on with the history of Israel, the Old Testament, and their hopes for a Messiah. So the key distinction that we want to think about is the difference between people who survive by hunting and gathering, which is harvesting their food from living ecosystems, and people who live from agriculture and ranching, which means transforming the land into a new kind of ecosystem.
Okay.
So when you farm and you ranch, what you're basically doing is you're getting rid of all the species that are there to prioritize a couple of different ones. And so what happens is you get more calories, you produce more people, and they need more land in order to support those people. And it sort of constantly expands.
Yeah.
Now, the problem with this is that it's prone to more problems. Drought and disease are much more prevalent and affect the system more than hunting and gathering. If you're hunting and gathering and there's a drought, you kind of always have something to lean back on and there's not nearly the population pressure.
Yep. Yep.
You also have much more potential for war. You have bigger populations, you have empires, and so people are much more likely to face situations like the Lakota did of collapse.
Fighting for resources was a big part of that, of what happened in this country.
In this country, and then if you look at the Bible, if you read the Old Testament, that's what you see over and over and over again. After the initial sort of Garden of Eden, and then arrival in the Promised Land, what it is, it's a story of drought. It's a story of invasion. Israel is conquered by one empire after the other. And so their hope for a Messiah is that something will be bigger than that system. There's a spiritual power in the universe that can fix this problematic system.
Yeah. So the parallel there, for my mind, as I'm hearing you explain it, and you've done a great job of it, but hearing those parallels between 1890 and Old Testament is everything was rife for this new beginning, for something to come, something to help us, something to save us, and things. You use the word collapsed, and I don't think you can use a better word than that. So, what lesson does this teach us?
Well, I think it teaches a couple lessons. One is that Jesus, or Wanikia, he who makes live, is inherently ecological, right? We're so used to, in our context today, Jesus being reduced to this figure who saves me from my sin and brings me to another place outside this world. That's what salvation looks like.
Yeah.
And I don't want to belittle that. I think that's part of the Christian teaching.
Right.
But there's also this sense that that's often missed, that Jesus comes to bring a new heaven and a new earth. And this isn't some sort of like fancy theological idea that a couple people want to insert into the tradition. It's the end of the story. You go to the book of Revelation, and what happens? The same thing that happens in Black Elk's vision. All of creation is renewed. All beings are happy. All suffering and death is wiped away. It's not just I'm a happy person in some otherly world heaven. It's that everything that exists, the whole cosmos, is renewed in harmony.
Yeah. And again, I think you and I have talked about this with Revelations before, and it reminds me a little bit of my daughter, who's a teenager, read Revelations recently for the first time. And you come home and you have these ideas about just what that means, hell and fires and destruction and all this kind of stuff. But you said again, the end of it is not that. What is it again?
Well, so there's no. It's not surprised your daughter would read that and get those parts.
Yeah. And
a lot of people focus on that.
Yeah.
There's a lot of crazy stuff that happens. A lot of talk about suffering and empires that are getting punished and all of that. But when you get to the end, and as we know, the end is the most important part of any movie, any song. What happens at the end?
Yeah.
In the last few chapters, all it's about is the restoration of all creation into God. God is all in all.
Yeah.
Which makes all that suffering before it really just a blip.
Yeah.
If you have the proper perspective.
So, what else can be taught by these parallels, by the ghost dance and your study?
I think the other thing that we can learn is that Christianity, mostly because of its Jewish inheritance, has this harmony component as well, right? So we talked about Lakota spirituality really being about that people may live. That what you're trying to do as a hunter and gatherer, when you live off the land, is to create a situation in which you are living in sync with how the world works, right? You're not trying to change the world. You're trying to become like the world.
Yeah.
And Christianity and Jewish tradition has that too. In Hebrew, it's called shalom. This idea that you sit in peace and harmony with all that's around you. And there were ceremonies for that too as well. That could be a whole other podcast later on.
Right.
But to recover that, to understand that Catholic practice is not, again, about getting out of this corrupt world into a better place. though sometimes we need to think like that.
Right.
How do we sit in this world in a harmonious way? What are those practices that can cultivate that? How can we recover them? And one small example is that they used to have what were called rogation days, which is where there would be these ceremonies where the priest would bless the fields for planting, right? And that's a very small version of like Lakota ceremony. I don't want to say that's the same thing.
Right.
But that's an area to sort of look at and say, we need to recover more of that for those of us who aren't on this sort of indigenous spiritual journey at the same time. It's there.
Yeah.
And so how can we make that part of our living spirituality?
Absolutely. Well, the beginning of that is having conversations just like the one that we're having right now, and learning about it and living that way, and it just sticking our big toes into it, right? And you're obviously at a different point with understanding that than I am, but I'm further along than I used to be, and you know how that goes. You just continue to grow in that. So, anything else you'd like to add?
I'll just say that we're all looking at Black Elk in the distance, and our elders like that who have gone much further than us, and we just hopefully keep on their trail and pray for them that they're recognized in the way they should be.
Yeah.
Black Elk as a canonized saint, and that he intercede for us on our journey here.
Yeah, he sure seems to be a model of harmony for me, and I think that's the word that we're looking at for this particular podcast here. Would you agree?
Amen, brother.
Yeah, there we go. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for having the conversation. And thank you to our audience for joining us here at Ho-Chokeh at the Center of St. Joseph's Indian School as we talk about issues that are central to Native American education today. Until next time, stay centered.